Hello everyone and welcome to the next session in the NABSA virtual conference. This session is Big Brother or Big Privacy, discussing GBFS and data privacy principles. As you're all joining, I'll just make a few announcements. After this session, we'll have a short break before the next panel starts. The next sessions will be what gets measured gets managed, making better use of data in managing micromobility systems. A penny for your thoughts on pricing. A guided discussion on pricing micromobility, and beyond the bike, engagement, empowerment, and partnership building is vital parts of highly successful systems. A public forum is a great place to discuss your conference session takeaways with fellow attendees. Hop over for a few minutes during the break and share what you've been learning. Also, go and visit the expo, where you can talk with exhibitors and even earn points by engaging. Check the game tag to see more ways that you can earn points. And if you're sharing conference highlights on Twitter, please use the hashtag NABSA2020 to keep us in the loop. We'll be getting started in just a moment.
Thanks, Peter. And actually, we can't see. Yep, there we go. Cool. Okay, everybody who's coming in and joining us for this session, I'm just going to kick it off with a few comments. This session is going to cover two projects that are very close to NABSA's heart. We've been working on. It's going to cover what's been going on with GBFS and with our recent partnership this year with MobilityData. We're going to have Heidi Gwinnen talk about that. And then the session's also going to cover a partnership we have this year with NUMO and OMF on data privacy principles. The first half of the session will be the GBFS half of it, where again, Heidi will speak. We'll have some time for audience Q&A after that. And then we'll transition to the second part of the session, which will be a wonderfully theatrical mock debate. And then we'll give a little presentation from Sebastian on the updates and status of the project itself, and then we'll also have time for audience Q&A after that. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Heidi to give the GBFS updates portion.
Great, thank you. And so while those slides are coming up, I'm Heidi Gwinnen. I'm the product manager for shared mobility at MobilityData. MobilityData is a Montreal-based international nonprofit who works on improving transportation data formats and have been working with NABSA since 2019 on improving GBFS. And so what I'm going to talk about today is what's happened in that last year. It's been a little over a year since we started that project, and we had our first annual GBFS developers workshop last year in conjunction with the NABSA conference. This year, because we weren't going to benefit from having everyone physically in the same place, we decided to give everybody a break and separate out that whole day of technical discussion from the conference. And so we just finished that a couple weeks ago, and just want to give you an update on what we've accomplished with GBFS in that last year. So you can go to the next slide. Peter, you can do that. Thank you. So just for folks, if there's anybody in the room who needs this quick background on what GBFS is, so it's the general Bikeshare Feed Specification, although the B at this point is we're looking for creative ideas about what it could stand for to make it broader than Bikeshare now that it represents more things. We can talk about that later. So this was created by Mitch Vars in 2015 when Mitch was a volunteer and board member with NABSA. We're lucky now that Mitch actually works with MobilityData as a senior data modeler working on GBFS. And NABSA adopted GBFS in kind of late 2015 and really Motivate Bikeshare, which is what you can see here, was amongst the first operators to start using that data format. And before then, bike sharing systems switched between different code formats, and it was difficult for application developers to create tools for travelers. So GBFS now in 2019, with scooters and electric bikes and dockless shared mobility on the streets, the GBFS wasn't representing all of those options that well anymore. And so through this competitive process that NABSA put out an RFP and we were selected, we started working on that together. You can go to the next slide, Peter. So GBFS was created to allow where you could see where stations were, where what the station status was. Is it full? Is it empty? You know, are there bikes available there? And this little spot, you can see kind of where all the systems in North America are, and you'll see some X's there thanks to COVID, and you can kind of dive in a little bit. So this is just one way that you can see on the bike share map, for instance, all the different kinds of information that GBFS has traditionally shown you. Go to the next slide. So since that time in 2019, we spent a lot of time looking at the current and the past GitHub issues, kind of analyzing where we are right now. We read all of the posts and identified some of the priority problems that we should focus our efforts on. And then we worked with stakeholders to develop and implement those solutions, and creating a clearer governance process around that as well. And so part of that for this last year has been the 2 developer workshops that we've done. We've also had workshops in North America, and in Europe, we've done localized language workshops in French and Spanish, and been kind of broadening the community of stakeholders around GBFS. Go to the next slide. So when I say GBFS, this is the collection of files that I'm referring to. So altogether, all these different files represent the information that travelers are going to want to know about the shared mobility services that are available to them. And but currently these files, they still only represent some of the information, and that's why we're continuing to constantly work on improving GBFS and making sure that it can really show you what's on the ground. So travelers don't see this though, they see the next slide. They see options that get presented to them in travel planning applications. So this is where, you can see how different, how one app can show you like all the different options that are available, how far you can travel. These are some of the ways that travelers can see this information. And so this is something that right now, in the past, this information may have been available in a non-standardized format as operators and trip planning applications, we're working on sort of one-off solutions. And the more that we improve and clarify GBFS, the more that information is created in a standardized way, and more trip planning applications can use that information to give travelers all of their options in one fell swoop. So the next slide. So a year ago, these were the major issues that had come up in through the GBFS community on GitHub in the repository where the specification lives. And these are the issues that we talked about during the developers workshop last year. And so I want to walk through each of these and just kind of let you know, give you the update on what's happened since then. Go to the next slide. So since then, licensing is coming up in 3.0. We've added some more information in the repo, and then we're going to be requiring it to be part of how a feed is presented. So that makes it easier for folks to know how they can use the data. Bike ID we've handled the privacy issues that were happening with a stable bike ID, and I'll talk about that briefly. Vehicle types and geofencing are coming. They're in a release candidate that is, right now, we have some folks who are working on implementing that. And as soon as it's actually implemented, it'll be part of the official GBFS. Deep links came on in version 1.1. Our extension for fares and pricing is open right now. So we anticipate that passing, and next week being able to represent fares and pricing of these operations better. Versioning came on in 1.1, and we're working on best practices right now. And I think we can talk about that a little later. Mitch has been working on that, and we'll be ready to share that with folks soon. Go to the next slide. So this is what's coming in the future. All of these things still have more work to do. So we're phasing these little bits, and you'll see that we've got more recommendations to develop around licensing. We're talking about, we know that cities are using private GBFS feeds. It's, we want to talk about how to do that right. Adding more vehicle types and accessories. I mentioned we're extending to car sharing, and that brings a whole other set of complications. Adding more geofencing use cases, requiring the rotation of deep links so that it doesn't create that same privacy issue that Bike ID had. Our pricing proposals up for a vote, and then we'll keep phasing in more and more complicated pricing abilities there. We're going to be documenting how we're doing versioning, which is a little bit of a complicated mess, finalizing those best practices and making some changes to the specification. And then we have some other changes coming up with the data set catalog, with the governance process being finalized, this car sharing extension, and then we're building tools to make sure that the data that's out there is reliable and trustworthy. You can go to the next slide. So licensing, next slide, just really briefly, in the last part of the project, we put together some information about the kinds of licenses that would be common for this sort of data. This was in conjunction with the community, but we really heard that we need a recommendation, that there's a preference, that there are, that MobilityData in conjunction with the community says, these are the licenses that we recommend for a public GBFS data set, and that'll make life easier for the aggregator. So that's something that we'll be working on in the next year. And the next slide, private GBFS, you can go to the next slide, is another one that we discussed. So bicycle ID, you used to have a stable ID for Bikeshare bikes. That worked well enough when a person had to walk to a dock and they took their ride and then they left it at a new dock. Being able to see that specific bike moved from one place to another didn't have quite the same implications that it does when people are taking bikes or scooters from right in front of their home to wherever their destination is and potentially back again. It becomes a lot easier to track an individual person's movements. And so in version 2.0, we require the rotation of bicycle ID, but we know that what happened is that there were cities who were using that in particular ways. There were third-party aggregators using it, and we broke some of their use cases. So when we did that, we promised we would come back to them with some solutions. So we're working on that now. We also know that the more information we provide about a vehicle, when we say it's got a bell and it has this much cargo capacity and this much charge and it's seated or standing, the more information we create, the easier it gets to identify that particular vehicle. So we know we've got some work to do on understanding the privacy implications there. And then we also have been hearing from operators that there's data that cities have been asking for pretty routinely in a private feed that may be competitively sensitive, and being able to make that standardized kind of across the industry would be really helpful. So we have a working group that we're going to be starting on this topic soon. And if you're interested, you can email me and I will get you in touch with Marla on our team who's going to be working on that. You can go to the next slide. Okay, and so vehicle types, this is another one. When we got started, GBFS meant docked bike share, and more stuff started showing up on the streets, lots of different operating models and lots of different modes out there. And we want GBFS to be able to provide the information that travelers are looking for with respect to that. So we've done a good kind of early job of making sure that we can talk about scooters and we can talk about electrification. But if you can go to the next slide. And that came in version 2.1 RC, where we started to talk about the kind of vehicle, how it's propelled, what its range is, and better information about stations. You can go to the next one. But we know that there's some limitations to this, and so we're going to be continuing to work on this in the next year, and would love your participation in that. And then the next slide, skip to that one. Yep, so geofencing, this is another one that we absolutely had to do to support dockless systems and hybrid systems. And so 2.1 RC has done that, and we've gotten some feedback, and we've been changing how that's going to function. But we know that there's a lot more complicated rules that we still have to work with and figure out how we're gonna model those. So if we can go to the next slide. This is what we can do now. So geofencing kind of can take a real world virtual boundary and we can put it in a way that we can like represent that for travelers. Right now we can do it where you can drop off or pick up your bike or your scooter where you can ride through or not, and speed limit. And that's it right now. If we can go to the next one. So and we can represent virtual stations by saying this is where a bike can be dropped off and it can hold this many bikes or it can hold unlimited bikes. And so that's another use that we've got for geofencing now. You can go to the next slide and then the next slide. And this is kind of what it might look like in an app. So this is regulated areas where vehicles can't go, the no parking zones. You can go down to the next slide. And these are more examples of what this looks like in an app, right? So you can see how folks will use this, and sometimes it'll have that like extra text with it. These are all proprietary solutions right now because GBFS 2.1 is brand new. So now this will be able to happen in a way that all of the applications that use GBFS data will have access to that same data. And if you go to the next slide, if you want more information on that, you can go to these Medium articles that are published in English and Spanish that talk about that. Deep links, if you can go 2 slides down. So basically, what Deep Links allows is, I'm going to speed us up since we're running out of time. If you could go to the next slide. When you open up and you find a bike or a station, you'll be able to click, and now GBFS allows you to basically go right to that provider's application, right to that bike, right to that station. It'll look to see if someone has it and has the app installed on their phone, and if they don't, it'll take them to the right store. So this is something that just makes the whole experience a little more seamless for travelers as they're trying to see what's available to them on the ground. And that came in version 1.1. This was an early improvement that we were able to do. And if you want to, Peter, go down to the pricing slides. Thank you. So pricing right now it basically just is price, is it taxed, and a big text field. So that's not very helpful for travelers to be able to understand that in a machine readable way through their applications. And we also know that a lot of these pricing schemes are pretty complicated. We've already talked about that a couple times here at the conference. So we have some pricing proposals open right now that are designed to more effectively model all of the different pricing options that are on the ground and increasingly more complicated. So we have a kind of a core proposal that's up for a vote right now that will model a lot of different systems, and it'll make it easier for travelers to get that information. And then we'll have increasingly kind of more complicated proposals that we'll be bringing up for a vote in the future. And if you want to just go down to, I guess, slide 39, you can go, and there. So you can see these are some of the things that we'll be adding some of these more complicated pieces of information, and you can see kind of what that might look like in a planning application. Okay, great. We can go down to car sharing. If you want to go a few more slides. Perfect. So car sharing, we added car as a mode in GBFS in the last year as a mode option, and this is in part because we had some questions about GBFS being able to represent car sharing, and now we've got some folks who are really interested in doing that, and particularly we're working with the French Car Sharing Association and with the European cities and countries needing to present public data about transportation. Being able to represent the car sharing through GBFS is an extra motivation for us. So if you can go to the next slide. So we're going to be extending several different files, and over time we'll be trying to make these a little more inclusive to vehicles in general, shared vehicles, and not just bikes in terms of their names. But this is where we're starting, and if you are interested in this, then we would love to chat with you about that too. Maybe not as much for the NABSA crowd, but this is something that's GBFS is going to be extending to. And then the last thing, if you want to go to the very last slide, this is what's coming up. Oh, yep, thank you. We're doing an industry survey. We're going to be trying to better understand GBFS technical and business needs again. We're working on improving the repository of the data sets and making sure that we have tools in place to make that data trustworthy and reliable. We're going to continue enhancing all of those kind of minimum proposals that we did to make things more detailed information available to travelers. We're going to be exploring those license recommendations. And so if you have opinions on that, what has worked and not worked for you in the past, we would love to hear about that. We're continuing to work with stakeholders across North America and Europe and really increasing the adoption of GBFS, and that's particularly true in Europe. We're working on that JSON schema and validator, and that's just to make sure that when you're looking at a GBFS data set, you have an idea of how quality the data is. We're working on some resources and training libraries. So we've been doing a lot of kind of GBFS 101 trainings, and we're going to keep doing that. We've got workshops for our MobilityData members where we really dive into that stuff in a lot more detail. And then we're coordinating with some, related specifications here. We've got some listed, and of course, we've got Yasha in the room, and we're working with MDS as well. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thanks, Heidi. So that was a lot of information all at once. Really appreciate it. Everybody, you can type your questions in the chat box. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes or so of questions if you've got them. So feel free to put them in the chat box. Heidi, you can certainly just respond to them as they come in. Also, if we get a lot at once, I'm happy to help organize those for you as well. I will say we got one comment that did come in, a suggestion for the new GBFS, what that might mean, general broadly shared feed specification. Thought that was pretty clever. We've got a lot of suggestions between the GBFS developer workshop and all of that. So that's another good one.
Yeah, I like that one. And right in here, our executive director had suggested general mobility feed specification. Definitely taking.
So yeah, exactly right. So keep them coming as well. Good ideas. And we'll just wait here for folks to think of their questions and pop them in there.
And that was a lot. So if there's just even a very basic, like, what on earth did you say when you tackled this topic? I'm happy to just recover that information.
Is there anything, Heidi, that in the meantime, while folks think of questions, and maybe it was very straightforward, you were very clear, so maybe there aren't any questions, but is there anything you kind of skipped over in the service of time, which I really appreciate you being very serious about the time we gave you for your presentation, but is there anything that sticks out to you that you didn't get to that you might want to mention now, if we have a few extra minutes?
I mean, I think the only thing that as I would kind of try to push home is that, you know, GBFS is now really able to represent docked and dockless and hybrid bike share schemes. And so if you are a city who like has had pushback about what GBFS could or couldn't do when you've asked operators to publish it, or if you're an operator who didn't want to publish it because it didn't accurately represent what you were actually providing, you know, I think we're getting closer. And if there's more that you would love to see represented that's not, that you know travelers need, we're open to those conversations. And GitHub is where those are happening, but I know GitHub is a little intimidating for a lot of folks, and so the MobilityData team is also just happy to hear about those things and talk to you about them and start to kind of represent those concerns as needed. And yeah, and more what resources would be helpful is also useful for us to know as we're putting together these GBFS 101 videos and doing more trainings. Understanding what level of information would be helpful from you all is really helpful for us. So in the US, so got a question from Lauren Smith. So in the US, it's hard to say right now. I mean, I don't know where you're from, Lauren. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and we had so many options and they all poof, disappeared. And so the push that we're getting on car sharing is primarily from European cities. And we want to make sure that we're able to represent a potential return in North America in the future. But right now, most of our stakeholders who are really helping us develop the spec are in Europe. Yeah, so the Noise question about a way to validate the participation of the systems and evaluate the quality of the data. So we are creating a JSON schema that we can make sure that we're validating against. And then we're going to be looking through the dataset catalog. We're going to be potentially changing the format of it and validating all those datasets as they come in. And then I think in the future, beyond just a validation tool, we would imagine doing more of a grading tool. So that's something that MobilityData is working on for transit data sets is a grading scheme. And I imagine us going in that direction with GBFS as well. One of the big conversations around improving the data catalog is that right now it's very easy for any volunteer to add a system into the systems.csv. But that means that the operator doesn't always know that that has been added. Maybe the city doesn't know that has been added. And so if something changes on their endpoint, they don't know to update systems.csv. So we're going to have a tension between making sure that as many systems can be added as possible, and it's easy for folks to do that, while also having the tools in place that when those systems are added, but then they're not updated and we're not getting new information, that's flagged for all the folks who are using it. And that's really what we're working towards this year.
Cool, thanks, Heidi. Well, I don't see any other questions come in, so I think that you did a really, really thorough job explaining, and of course, Heidi is a resource for any other questions if they come up later. So now we're going to transition to the second part of this session, which is discussing the Privacy Principles Partnership Project with a mock debate. Yasha Franklin Hodge is going to be the moderator of the debate. Our mock debaters are going to be John Clary from City of Austin, Robin Chase, transportation entrepreneur, and Rodney Stiles from Populous. So I'm also going to stop recording now, and Peter will stop sharing his screen so that the debaters are really front and center in all of us. I'm sure this is going to be riveting. So handing it over now to you, Yasha.
You're all a hard act to follow now. Now that I have to get serious again. We do have some slides, so just wait for them to be up on the screen. And yes, I agree with Ed. I think the next presidential debate might look better this way. Cool. So I'm gonna take just 3 minutes of your time to talk about the Privacy Principles Partnership. It's an initiative we launched in June. The 3 organizations you see below on your screens, so OMF, NABSA, and NUMO. Next slide. So what is this Privacy Principles Partnership? It's convened by these 3 organizations, but we have a broad composition of people from all over across the industry. We have people from cities and city advisors, operators, and privacy experts. And the objective of this is really, think about some of these nuances and some of these issues that you just heard during the debate. It's a very, contentious topic. It's a very difficult topic. There are no right or wrong answers, or none of us have any right or wrong answers. So our objective is really, trying to figure out if there is a way that we can, get all together and come to intermediate positions and positions that really help advance the topic of privacy. Next. Our expected outcome of this work is to articulate some sort of high-level principles, something that we can all back up, and that these principles really, first of all, reflect what the industry believes is the best approach to privacy. And again, by industry, I mean both public, private, and nonprofit organizations. And in that sense, what we expect is that these principles should be broadly accepted by the whole community. And the last objective of this is really to help all of us think about the topic of privacy and help us deal with privacy in a better way. And just, I have the example here of the shared mobility principles for livable cities, which is something we look up to when we think about what high-level principles for a topic might look like. So if you haven't looked at those, just check them out and you'll get a sense of what we're trying to aim for. Next slide. Our process is, it's very simple. As I mentioned, none of us really have the right answer to any of these questions, but we're really trying to educate ourselves to make, to produce these principles in the most educated way. So our process starts with really bringing in experts on some of these topics. And some of the topics we have discussed so far are topics such as data minimization, defining purpose, and de-anonymization. I think in particular, the defining purpose element came in the debate we just heard. And again, it's not an easy topic to deal with, but these are some of the things that we're really discussing during this process. Then we are having some guided discussions where all the different stakeholders have a moment to agree, to disagree, to express their opinions, to really work towards creating a consensus. And then the last part of our work is really to draft the principles. And we are using these expert talks and all the debates that we're having to craft these principles. Once we have a good set of principles that the group feels comfortable with, we will put them out for broader consultation. Next slide. So where we are right now, we are still having some of these expert consultations. We already started drafting the set of principles that are reflecting some of these discussions, but we're still in the process of really tweaking some things and just adding some additional things that always come up. But we're really going, we're in a really good position at this point to perhaps have something to make a bit more public in the next couple of months. Next slide. So if you want to learn more about this process, feel free to reach out to any of us that we are, conveners of this group, and we will be happy to answer any questions.